Why is there such an obsession around making sure that we change our sexual ethics, right? Why do churches, for example, fly pride flags? Why do corporations get involved in these things? Why has our society become obsessed with sexual ethics? Why is our society obsessed with racism? Why is that something that is constantly being talked about? Why are there such vociferous denunciations around something that could be, and I'll kind of get into details here in a little bit, but even simple stereotypes and things like that, why are those considered incredibly dangerous? Or what's going on with Israel and the Palestinians and Hamas? Why is there such an obsession around Israel? All of these things have a thread in common that the Bible actually predicts. And the reason for anti-Semitism, the reason why there's an obsession around sexual ethics, the reason why today there's such an obsession around racism as a unique sin that needs to be stamped out more than any other, has to do with something that the Bible goes into detail to predict. And from Genesis to Revelation talks about it is that
Hi, welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
we have a hidden problem that is not being discussed in our culture. What the Bible describes is that people primarily are struggling with a desire to be seen as good, with a desire for moral virtue, that we need something to tell us that we're good people. All the way back in the garden, when our first parents took from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, there was an assumption on our part that we would understand what good is and that we have this knowledge of what is good and what is evil and that we are on the good side. And so people need this kind of moral supply. They need to know that they are good. And we have books like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which I think is incredible and fascinating, where he's unveiling something that has just had massive impacts on people's lives, that people have a basic need to know that their life is meaningful, right? That there's a purpose, and that if you lack that, then it can really destroy your life. But what we don't have is a Viktor Frankl book, a similar popularity, unveiling the fact that man has a search for morality. Man has an obsession with being good at a similar level. Like, you will hate your life, hate yourself, if you do not come to the conclusion that you're on the good side, you're on the right side of history, that you're not one of the baddies. We need to know that. We need to believe that. There's something inside of us that desperately needs to be morally justified. And how do we do that? How do we gain access to this moral supply that we all desperately need? And the Bible talks about how people do that. They embark on morality projects to essentially mine morality from the culture around them and to cause them to feel like they're better than other people morally. And the way that we do this, and there are waves of this in culture, is that we pick certain topics and we cherry pick those topics based on things that we can achieve. We're not objective about this at all. We don't think about this from the perspective of is there an objective morality out there and how do we measure up? If we did that, we would come to the horrific conclusion that we're bad people, that, we lie, we cheat, we're selfish, we don't love people the way we should. There are so many problems with our character. We're lazy. And so we would come to the conclusion very quickly that there's something deeply morally wrong with us. And we can't come to that conclusion because the shame, there's no way we would avoid or be able to overcome the shame. If you begin the project without any hope that you're going to be able to overcome the negative conclusions that you might reach about yourself, then you're not going to come to those conclusions. And so how do we do this? Well, we have to cherry pick specific areas where we can gain moral virtue that is not going to be assailed by others. And we have to create around us an entire community of people, an entire culture, that would be even better, that is constantly reinforcing that this is the right standard. These are the good people, these are the bad people. And so you look at something like sexual ethics, right? We've known for so long, and every religion of the world that is popular at any level has kind of a similar idea of sexual ethics, right? That it's really important to be faithful to one spouse or if you make a covenant with your spouse, you need to be sexually faithful to that spouse. So that's a very specific and very difficult ethic. Imagine if somebody came along and said, "No, let's actually celebrate promiscuity. Let's actually make people that are monogamous evil, and then let's make people that are promiscuous morally good." Wow, imagine the amount of moral supply we could mine from a culture that would embrace something like that. And so you take the most perverse kinds of sexual expressions in our culture, because if you can take those and celebrate them, this is going to give an endless amount of moral supply to people that are promiscuous. Imagine actually denigrating people who are monogamous, who are creating families, who are creating environments that are known by everyone to be the best for children and the best for society. And let's make those the baddies. This is such an incredible, and then what if we got the churches to actually adopt our same sexual ethics so that those who are promoting morality are telling us that we're the ones who are moral, and that those people that are holding to the objective sexual ethic from the actual Christian faith, the Judeo-Christian faith, they would say that those people are actually the ones who are evil. Endless amounts of moral supply could come from that. And so you can take something that is like incredibly perverse, like homosexual sex. I know that's incredibly unpopular to say. The only reason you would react to that, again, is for the same reason that I'm describing. You have been conditioned to believe that what I'm about to tell you is morally evil so that you can provide moral supply to people who are desperately needing it because they don't have access to feeling that they're a good person. And so we've promoted this idea that homosexual sex, which if you look at the most promiscuous people in any society, they're gay men, right? So the number of sexual encounters that gay men engage in is off the charts. This is not something that any society that wants to really flourish at any level would ever promote. But our society is saying, look, the most promiscuous people in our society need to be protected, and their sexual expression needs to become sacred. The rest of us, whether you're homosexual or heterosexual, you can mine endless amounts of moral supply from feeling that you are better because, yes, I might be having sex with lots and lots of people. I'm destroying my soul, destroying society through just rampant promiscuity. But that's actually a good thing because I can feel good about myself and actually believe that I'm morally superior to these bigots out there who believe that there's something morally wrong. And so I can feel morally superior while doing something deeply immoral. This is the project. And we just have to talk about it very openly because it confuses people so deeply. They don't understand how much we're all being impacted by being drug along into other people's moral projects. Now, I'm going to take a little step back and just talk about what is the Bible solution to this? The Bible has a very specific solution to this, and it's remarkable. Because the Bible, again, predicts that every person is going to be obsessed with this question, and it will destroy their life and destroy society as a whole if we do not figure out how to overcome the kind of shame that comes from believing that you're a bad person. And so the way that the gospel deals with this is it tells everyone, hey, we're going to solve this problem for you once and for all. Yes, you are a bad person. Yes, you're one of the baddies. The entire story of the gospel has to begin, someone's journey into the truth begins with them coming to that conclusion, right? That's why the Bible says repent. It says you have to believe and agree that you're one of the baddies. Now, this would be a terrifying thing to admit to a creature who desperately needs to be morally justified, to come to the conclusion that my identity is actually that I am a depraved person, that I'm one of the baddies. That is a huge admission. And the only people that can make that kind of admission are the kinds of people who know that on the other side of that terrifying admission, that there is going to be some way for them to achieve redemption. And how do we achieve redemption? Well, if we achieved redemption by embarking on a morality project where, yes, maybe I'm one of the baddies, but if I keep these 20 rules, I can make amends for being a baddie and become a goodie. If you did that, you would destroy society all over again because, of course, then you would end up with these hypocrites who are judging everyone and are incredibly self-righteous and morally smug and superior. The only way out of this horrible dilemma is to all agree about the truth that I'm one of the baddies, and then to believe that the way that I overcome being one of the baddies is that through what someone else did. There's one person who's ever lived in the entire history of the world that was a good person. That was the only person. And that person, they decided to die for me, and not just for me, but for everyone else who would make the decision to follow them and to really switch places with them. It's this idea of like, they're going to take on my sin and I'm going to take on their righteousness. And so when I feel like one of the goodies, I can feel fully like I am justified. I am good. I am perfect. I am pure. But I know that that's not coming from me. That's coming from someone else. That's only coming through faith in what that person achieved on my behalf. Therefore, I can simultaneously overcome shame while at the same time not becoming proud. That is absolutely a remarkable solution to this endless dilemma that is destroying every civilization in the history of the world. This dilemma of how do we overcome this need for morality, the feeling like I'm a good person. So another example is racism, right? Racism is bad. It's hurt a lot of people. However, like there's a popular influencer, Nick Fuentes, who's been going on all these podcasts lately. And one of the things I found so fascinating about following, and I didn't know much about this guy, but he's sort of openly racist in that he believes that we should be free and actually we should promote making sort of broad stereotypes about race. You know, black people are like this, white people are like this, Indian people are like this, women are like this, men are like, just all tons and tons and tons of generalizations. And those generalizations are understandable. When you know an individual, you can get to know them as an individual. But the generalizations still hold. Jews are like this, anti-Semitic, whatever. So this is what he believes, and this is a very common belief. This is not unusual historically. It's not unusual in general. It's incredibly unusual for it to be promoted and defended in the articulate way that he tends to promote and defend it. But what's really crazy about his story is the full power of the state came down on him. He was put on a no-fly list, debanking, like kicked off, of course, of every social media platform. And I think the thing that's interesting about the topic isn't his overt racism. What's really interesting about the topic is why this one kind of sin. And again, there's hundreds of sins, thousands of sins. There's so many bad sins that people are promoting every day. The question isn't whether or not there are sinful people out there. The question is, why do we cherry pick certain sins and just vilify somebody? Just you should be destroyed. I think the reason for that is people were getting moral supply from the feeling that I am a good person, not because I'm actually doing anything to really help others. I'm good because I won't say out loud, and I will try to resist in myself the tendency to stereotype groups of people. So we had millions of people in our society who were feeling morally like good people. I'm not one of the baddies, I'm one of the goodies because I don't participate in this, fairly normal human sin of stereotyping. Okay. And so if people are getting enormous amounts of moral supply, then if somebody rises up and defends that action, I can just get tons of moral supply by denouncing those people, by talking about that, and by sharing. Like, it's just every time I denounce that person, I am promoting my moral superiority. And again, it's important to just admit, as somebody who believes in the gospel, that the Bible said, yeah, you do need this. You need moral supply. Like, this is not something that you should pursue a way out of shame about feeling like you're a bad person. Like, every one of us needs to embark on a journey to figure out how to overcome this. And I wish more people would embark on that journey. The problem is that when we embark on this journey in kind of rationally absurd ways, by cherry picking particular sins, Some sins that are completely destroying society, we will say, oh, those aren't big deals at all. Some sins that are fairly normal, we're going to say those are horrible because we've all figured out a way to overcome that particular sin. And that's also happening with the situation in the Middle East and why anti-Semitism is so rampant. And the real hidden reason for anti-Semitism is there is no group of people on the planet that you can mine more moral superiority, more moral supply from than Jewish people. They're the best because they're the one ethnic group of people that actually claims, and by ethnic, because there's a fusion between, in the word Judaism, between a religion and a ethnic group. There's a fusion there, and part of what that looks like to everyone is that they are proclaiming themselves as moral people. And there is no better way to get moral supply than to feel more moral than somebody who claims to be a moral person or from a group that is attempting to become more moral. Like it's that's kind of obvious, right? If I can, what people are doing is they're not trying to become objectively moral. They don't believe in God. Most of these people who are doing on these projects, they aren't necessarily saying there's an objective morality. So the only way to know if you're a good person or a bad person is in contrast to other people, because there's not a belief necessarily in an objective standard. And so if you can find a whole group of people that believe they're really moral and they actually do try really hard to be moral, and then you can denounce them. I mean, you can just get floods and floods and floods of moral supply from that story. And so that's the reason why people are obsessed with the Jews. Anytime they're involved in anything, there's an absolute obsession with what they're doing because we can mine moral supply from any of those kinds of situations. So that is the constant state the world is in. And so it doesn't matter that there are more people being killed in Nigeria, right? That there's a horrible Christian genocide going on in Nigeria. Nobody cares about that. You can't mine moral supply by condemning Boko Haram, right? What they're doing in Nigeria, because you already feel morally superior to them. But if you can look at the IDF, for example, the Israeli Defense Forces, which I think is objectively the most moral military on the face of the earth. I think you can look at that, you can study that, you can try to understand that. And if you're listening to this and you're like, that is absurd, you're crazy. Congratulations. You are mining so much moral supply from your superiority of Jewish people. That's why that reaction is either being cultivated in you because of what you're watching in the media, or something that you're actively pursuing because you're lacking an understanding of your own morality. Because if you look at I'm not saying that everything they're doing is right. I said in contrast to other militaries. If you look at other militaries around the world, how they conduct themselves in the midst of war, there is something really unique about the IDF. That doesn't mean that there aren't horrible things happening and that there aren't children dying in Gaza. I'm saying that if you are actually attempting to be objective, you're not looking around the world and looking at other militaries. You're not looking at South Sudan and what's happening there or what happened in Syria. There's not the same level of interest because, again, it's not going to give you moral superiority. But if the IDF is trying to be moral and they're fused into this sort of Jewish world that is both ethnic and religious and attempting to meet a particular moral standard, and you can just declare your endless moral superiority to the Israeli government, to Jewish people in general, to the IDF, you're going to feel like a much more moral person. And so it makes a lot of sense for you to run around protesting against Israel because it's going to provide this moral supply for you. Now, so I just wanted to unpack what's happening. And so I just want to give you guys a rubric or a lens through which to understand. And the Bible is what does this, right? The Bible gives us a very unusual lens to see the way that things play out in the world. And I'm just not hearing enough people speak through this biblical lens of it starts in Genesis where we have a problem with shame. That's the reason why Adam and Eve covered themselves. And then we all are trying to figure out all the way back from the beginning how to overcome this problem. And this is the solution. You either need to agree that you're a baddie and that you need to come into, through repentance, into connection with a way to become a good person that is not based on your own actions, so that you can at the same time become overcome shame while also not becoming proud and arrogant and hypocritical. The gospel is the only way out of this. And if not, these moral projects will destroy any society without the gospel. And so we have got to be out there proclaiming the truth of the gospel so that people are not trapped in these endless projects to promote and mine morality from specific cherry-picked sins while they are feeling, which gives them absolution for all the other often destructive sins that they are embracing in their life. So I don't know if that's helpful to you guys. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts about this, but I just feel like this is something so important to understand about the nature of reality that the Bible unveils for us.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.